The bombing is stopped. The fires are out. Europe lies in ruins. The dead are gone forever. The living carry on. Time to count the cost. Time to start again.
These words opened episode 25 of the iconic British documentary series of the 1970s, The World at War, which transported us to the chaos that reigned in Central Europe at the end of the Second World War. A period that, in short, was characterized by a total lack of compassion towards anyone considered an enemy, and in which disorder, mistrust, and confusion were the norm. In this regard, Czechoslovakia became one of the most critical hotbeds for the proliferation of so-called savage peace, emerging as one of the most brutal places of the excessive violence that erupted after the war, where its population, hardened by years of brutal and repressive occupation, vented their anger on any German soldier or civilian who crossed their path. The images speak for themselves. But among them all, there is one in particular that, unlike the others, has managed to endure in the collective memory as the best example of the suffering endured by women after the war. In the opening minutes of this episode, a woman, visibly exhausted and with her face severely beaten, walks along a desolate road, initially unaware of the camera recording her. These images, dating from May 1945, remained anonymous for almost 3 decades until their appearance in the BBC documentary sparked interest in discovering the woman now known on the internet as the lost German girl. But who is the lost German girl really, and what has been found out about her since she appeared in this series more than 50 years ago? Today, we delve into one of the most disturbing and intriguing enigmas left behind by the aftermath of the Second World War in Europe. May 1945. The Second World War has just ended in Europe. Germany's unconditional surrender, signed on the 8th of that month, seals the fate of the Third Reich, but even this cannot silence the echoes of suffering. The truth is that, after 6 years of devastating conflict, the continent lies in ruins, caught in a whirlwind of anarchy and despair that defies any hope of immediate peace. Against this chaotic backdrop, an American film crew sent by the US Army Signal Corps and led by Captain Orrin Haglund ventures into the western region of Bohemia, near the city of Pilsen in Czechoslovakia. These men's mission is clear: to capture on film the reality of a country devastated by war. Meanwhile, in the capital, Prague, Czech partisans have launched a massive uprising, galvanized by the fall of Berlin and Hitler's death. But the insurrection, which was expected to be short-lived, drags on even after the capitulation, as German resistance remains fierce. This finally leads to an intervention by Moscow, where on 6th May, the Soviet High Command sends the forces led by Marshal Ivan Konev to liberate the Czechoslovak capital and crush the last German forces in the region. An offensive that will last until the 11th of that same month. This was basically because the official surrender of the Third Reich did not subdue all its forces. One example of this was Army Group Center, entrenched in Prague at the time of the capitulation, which categorically refused to surrender to the Red Army. Aware of the consequences of laying down their arms to the Soviets, the German commanders decided to open a corridor to the west with the aim of surrendering to American forces and thus escaping Soviet captivity. It was in this context of resistance and flight from the Czechoslovak capital that Captain Haglund immortalized one of the scenes from the Second World War that would resonate most in recent decades, and whose protagonist would become known today as the Lost German Girl, a young woman who became a symbol of the helplessness of those days. In order to provide a better context for the flight of German forces in Prague, Czech historian Petros Tsironis comments in his work entitled On the Demarcation Line that the flight began coinciding with the outbreak of the uprising in the capital on the 5th of May. On that day, several groups of German soldiers, most of whom had formed families with Czech women during the occupation, began to leave the capital in organized columns bound for Pilsen, some 90 kilometers away, hoping to surrender to American forces once there. On the 8th of May, near the town of Mito, these first groups finally encountered the first American troops in the region. After surrendering their weapons, they were escorted on their march to Pilsen without further incident. However, between the villages of Holubkov and Rokycany, the contingent of more than 2,000 prisoners split into two. One, made up of Wehrmacht soldiers and civilians, advanced under escort towards Pilsen, while the other, consisting of about 200 people, mostly SS soldiers, and among whom was the Lost German Girl, remained behind, waiting their turn to continue on the side of the road. A few hours later, they continued on their way, but problems soon arose. After leaving Rokycany and less than 18 kilometers from Pilsen, a confrontation broke out between the German prisoners and their American escorts, apparently provoked by complaints from the former about attacks by Czech partisans and local residents thirsty for revenge. These unexpected attacks left 26 Germans dead and several wounded. And it was at that moment, somewhere on Highway 605, that the Lost German Girl was beaten. Although no evidence or signs of a possible rape have been found, everything indicates that she was stripped of her clothes, as revealed by Haglund's subsequent images, in which she appears wearing trousers that, at first glance, do not appear to be her size. It was almost 2 p.m. on the 8th of May when Haglund found her at kilometer 78 of Highway 605 walking towards the camera, visibly confused and marked by a severe blow to the face. It was later revealed that she was taken along with other German soldiers to a nearby area known as Garden 89, a kind of transit camp on the outskirts of the village of Apovich, about 12 kilometers from Pilsen. There, she was last seen. To date, no photographs or footage of the Lost German Girl have been found after the images captured by Haglund. Therefore, to learn more about her and begin to hypothesize about her possible fate and identity, we must turn to the footage itself. Starting at minute 21:46 of the original footage, a specific group of German prisoners can be seen with obvious signs of violence. It is known that they were filmed several kilometers from where the Lost German Girl was filmed. But the truth is that these prisoners appear to be the same group with whom she was marching from Prague. This is because, in a previous shot, she can be seen sitting among them, suggesting that she was sent to Pilsen on 8th May, the same day the footage was recorded. Taking all this into account, we can say that she could have had two possible fates. The first depends on whether she was treated as a civilian. In this case, she would have been deported to Germany between the 10th and 11th of May, when all ethnic German civilians were expelled from Czechoslovakia. But supposing she had been classified as military personnel, her deportation would have taken place later, specifically on July 4th, 1945, when the vast majority of these groups that arrived in Pilsen from Prague were deported to Bayreuth, a small German town about 145 kilometers from Pilsen. But is it possible to determine whether she was a civilian or a military auxiliary? Well, Hagelund's own images may bring us closer to the answer. Here, we see her with trembling hands holding what appear to be banknotes. This is money from the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, which by that date had already ceased to have any value. But we also see what appears to be a red German Labour Front booklet, this one in particular issued in the Sudetenland. This booklet, given to civilian workers in the Reich in Germany, Austria, and the protectorates of Bohemia and Moravia, indicates that she may have been a worker and not a military auxiliary. However, this is where the first contradiction arises. In Hagelund's shot card, she is listed as an SS girl, a label that clashes with the German Labour Front booklet and suggests that she was actually treated as a prisoner of war. At this point, the issue of the loose-fitting military trousers she wears arises again, leading us to wonder whether she was an SS soldier, a Luftwaffe auxiliary, or simply a civilian dressed in borrowed or found clothing to preserve her dignity. Of the various possible destinations that have been discussed, there are three that are generally accepted and, in fact, documented: one as a civilian and two as military personnel. As I have already mentioned, if she had been classified as a civilian, the story would have been simpler for her, as shortly after arriving in Pilsen or another place near the German border, she would have been taken by truck to a nearby train station, and from there deported to Germany with other Volksdeutsche. But the problem is that the label SS girl seems to point to a different path. In this regard, Jutta Rüdiger, the former leader of the League of German Girls, offers a glimpse into the fate of German women in the Wehrmacht and the SS in Czechoslovakia in her book entitled On the Problem of Women Soldiers, published in 1987. According to Rüdiger, on the 9th of May, these women, both from the Wehrmacht and the SS, were taken to Garden 89, near the village of Eipervis. Remember, the last place where the Lost German Girl was filmed. There, for fear of being attacked by Czech partisans, these women formed a kind of protective circle to shelter themselves and remain together at all times. While ethnic German civilians were taken to train stations, Wehrmacht personnel continued their march towards Pilsen, leaving behind all those classified as SS members and personnel. Although, as the images show, many were not wearing the uniform corresponding to their branch, they were identified as SS personnel anyway. This was because the Americans knew that it was common for many SS members to change their uniforms to avoid being lynched or executed. Be that as it may, the fact is that this group included about 100 women who, together with their male comrades, were placed under American surveillance in Garden 89. They remained there for almost 2 weeks until they were finally transferred to Pilsen for interrogation. But with the arrival of the Red Army in the city shortly afterwards, the Americans, for no apparent reason, decided to falsify their documents, labeling them as Luftwaffe personnel and thus preventing their immediate handover to the Soviet forces. After all this, on the 4th of July 1945, they were finally released in Bayreuth. Nevertheless, Rüdiger's account also reveals a third destination, undoubtedly the most tragic. She tells the story of 4 of the 100 women from the SS who remained in Garden 89, who, fearful of an even more tragic fate due to their label, ultimately attempted to join the Wehrmacht personnel disguised in civilian clothes they found in abandoned suitcases. Unfortunately for them, they were discovered, and again for no apparent or justifiable reason, handed over by the Americans to Czech partisans, where all trace of them was lost. Although possible, this ending is statistically the least likely for the lost German girl, as there is no concrete evidence beyond her public disappearance after Hagelund's footage. Personally, I believe that her most likely fate seems to have been transfer to Pilsen and subsequent release in Bayreuth, like most of the men and women traveling with her. But despite all the evidence and all the theories and hypotheses that have emerged since she rose to fame in the BBC documentary, the lost German girl remains a silent echo of the war, where her story and identity remain as elusive as the images that immortalized her. To be honest, we must admit that what makes this recording so iconic is the mystery surrounding its protagonist. Despite many years of research dedicated to finding out more about her, the identity of the lost German girl remains an unsolved enigma. The absence of further historical or academic sources has led to intense debate on social media platforms such as X and specialized forums such as War Relics Forum and Axis History Forum, where some users have argued that she could be a woman named Laura Bauer, Laura Vogt, or Ingrid Hansen. However, the truth is that there is no solid evidence to support these names. Everything points to her name, and therefore her fate, remaining lost in time. But this does not detract from the fact that she has become an enduring symbol of the silent suffering endured by so many women during and even after the war. As is often said, for her, as for many other women, the war continued long after the Reich surrendered.
Wir sind des Geiers schwarzer Haufen.
This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
That's the tale of a Europe in turmoil.
Upon this battle depends the survival of civilization.